There are 651 GameCube games, and I'm trying to beat them all while at the mercy of this horrendous wheel. Welcome to Beating the GameCube. Game number 18 is Jeremy McGrath Supercross World. Released in 2001, it was both developed and published by Acclaim Entertainment. Now, Acclaim cranked out a ton of games for the N64, and they wasted no time when it came to the GameCube either. This debuted very early into the system's lifespan and was one of 10 titles they released in the first several months alone. Has this ancient racer aged like fine wine or musty old milk? Let's find out. I immediately noticed how cheap the opening crawl is, some very 2000s music blares, and we get a peek at the graphics. This looks much more like a PS1 game than a GameCube one, but hopefully it'll be fun at least. There are several game modes available, but we're interested in finishing the career specifically by beating each of the 4 series on the default difficulty of Amateur. I also needed to pick my guy, and this is seriously the most 2000s game ever made.
How am I supposed to get excited to play these characters? Well, these men, they're all just like some dude. This guy looks like that meme of like the guy in the stadium with like his hand on his girlfriend's neck talking to her, explaining stuff.
I couldn't pick between these titans among men, so I had chat vote, and they wanted Hoa. So that's who I locked in. Hoa, you're not gonna pick Hoa. I also had to choose my bike, but you start with only a couple available. I went for the Tiger since it had the highest handling. With those picked, we were ready to crack on with our first event, the Baja Circuit. My initial few attempts were an unmitigated disaster. I was crashing into scenery and failing jumps left, right, and center. There is no tutorial, so I was figuring out the controls on the fly, and the handling is so loose it's more like racing on an oil slick. The other racers were complete menaces too. They would often drive straight into me, killing my momentum or knocking me clean off my bike. Those fiendish fiends. My first 10 minutes were just hilarious. It was a complete shambles, and my chatters were heckling me too. Good times. Eventually, I found a control rebinding section in the options, and this taught me what I was missing. I needed to preload my suspension before jumps to gain height, and could power slide for better handling. This instantly made a huge difference. With good timing, a preload will send you soaring through the skies, and that makes clearing those big gaps actually feasible. I even did my first ever stunt. I'm gaming! It was not all perfect though. Lots of the stage is invisibly walled, and things that look like jump points just simply aren't. Still, the sense of momentum in this game is pretty solid, and I was having fun nailing the jumps and keeping up with the pack. I did some research, and this game actually won awards for the worst game on the GameCube from sites like GameSpot back in the day. Steady on, mate, calm down. It might not be Pikmin or the Wind Waker, but worst game is a stretch. I personally was finding it okay so far. Similar to the real Baja, this series takes place on cross-country rally tracks, and I appreciated the scale and variety. To finish, you need to follow the arrow thingy on the top of the screen towards a series of checkpoints and complete 2 full laps while hitting them all. I was actually contesting for first near the end of lap 2, but that did not last. There is a jump right near the end that no matter how much I loaded my suspension, I just could not clear. I realized I needed to collect turbo boost by performing stunts, but half the time they just weren't counting, leaving me boostless, maidenless, and catapulting me back into last place.
My fight money!
This is the last jump before the finish line, so that meant starting over. I needed to stay in first and gain turbo, but I had the issue of fighting the game's controls. If you land at even a slight angle, you eat dirt. Tilt back too far, a tiny bit sideways, or anything else the game does not like, and you instantly fall off, losing a ton of time. This problem never really went away, but I at least learned how to deal with it enough to master that huge chasm, and with that, I took my first ever first place finish. Proudest day of my life. Scoring works like in Mario Kart, with points earned per race relative to your placement, and the winner having the highest total after the final race. Therefore, it isn't necessary to always come in first. I of course tried to do so anyway, because if you ain't first, you're last. Stage 2 was pretty vast. I mostly enjoyed the sprawling nature of the Baja tracks, and this one had some pretty cool jumps. On the less good side though, I often found it tricky to know where the next checkpoint would be. I don't think the map in the top right was overly informative, so learning each stage on the fly could be frustrating. On top of this, I was suffering even more with the temperamental landing system. My biggest gripe by far though, and this became much more relevant for a later event, is the stunt system. There are supposed to be dozens of tricks that you can perform with X, Y, or both, and then a directional input. This though is the buggiest feature in the game, and stunts usually won't come out until at least 5 seconds after an input, if at all. So many times I would do an input, nothing would happen, and then my guy would suddenly decide to do it 2 years later, right when I was trying to land. This shambles of a system really hurts the game and dampened an otherwise decently enjoyable experience. At this point, I just committed to no frills, just simple driving, and I almost completely swore off stunts. I would just aim to take the path with the least verticality where possible. After several attempts, I locked in a close second, giving me a firm lead in points total. I decided to swap my bike out for the Higgs VX. It's just a good all-rounder, and it has a higher top speed. Then it was on to track 3. This is the final stage of the Baja circuit. Only 3 tracks seems incredibly short to me. Maybe it's all that Mario Kart I've played in the past, but anything less than 4 just feels weird. On the plus side, I liked this map quite a bit. This was another sprawling landscape with some good tight turns and some honestly stomach-dropping jumps. I was still struggling with the controls and inconsistent landings, but was definitely finding my feet by now. And as with many of these games, streaming it was carrying the experience by making it more fun than it would be solo. I was heading for an easy first, but one bad landing right at the end sent me plummeting down to 4th. Thankfully, that was just enough points to let me stay first in the total, so I won this event by a hair. With that, we had cleared the Baja Series. There's no cutscene, there's no podium, no ceremony, just booted to the menu. Get out of here. So, with one down, it was on to the indoor series, kicking off with Oman Stadium, and straight away, I have one huge complaint. Some absolute tool decided to include advertising in the stadiums that has a left-pointing arrow for a logo, and of course I assumed that meant I was meant to be turning left. Compared to the Baja tracks, these indoor ones were far shorter and just very basic. I was in first the majority of this race, and besides the arrow thing, encountered no issues. Within no time at all, I'd locked in an easy first place on stage 1. Next up was Craddock Field, and this one was a little bit rough. I found the level design here deeply unintuitive. There were so many instances where I just couldn't tell mid-turn which way they wanted me to go, and at the speed you're traveling, this just left me crashing into barriers and other racers. The good news is you can restart every race as often as you like with no penalties, so after learning the stage, I reset for another attempt. Once I learned the track, I had a much better time. There are some crazy tight turns on these, so learning when to employ power slides and dab the brakes is very important. For amateur difficulty, the comps put up a decent fight, and there is some pretty strong rubber banding whenever you are out in front. I mostly found just staying ahead of the pack was the key to success. Enemy racers crashed into me so often that if I was stuck in a crowd, it was just a snowball into a loss. With this track mastered, I locked in another first place and was way out in front of the standings. Crossover Fields was much quicker to beat, despite some early hiccups like somehow hopping a barrier and driving the wrong way, and some downright baffling physics costing me first position. I was still able to schmoove across some really big jumps and even sneak in the occasional stunt. Even your classic baby bumps could not slow me down as I was just skimming across the top of them. I entered the final lap in third and had so many tourney points that I knew just locking this in would be more than enough to secure my lead, so I crossed the line, putting me at 23 points, 5 higher than second and third. Now this series did have 4 races, which is more what I expect. This was another one that took me a few attempts to learn the layout for. I do appreciate there being no restriction on retries, because I never found these maps intuitive, and I needed to get my bearings before I felt like I had a chance to win. Just like before, once I actually knew my way around the course, I put on a tour de force and sailed through. With few exceptions, I just camped in first place here, took no risks on jumps or tricks, and I locked in a very convincing dub. That placed me a mile ahead in points total, and with that I'd won the indoor series and was halfway to beating this game. I'm going to cover the outdoor series more loosely, so I have a chance to talk about more broad features of the game and my experience with it. Like the Baja, these tracks are bigger and a bit more varied, but I found them far less impressive visually or design-wise. They felt much more linear, and I really had no issues on track 1. So far, the Baja circuit was the only one I can say I actually enjoyed, and with the others being much more of a formality just to finish all of the series. Stage 2 was an assault on the eyes. It was just so visually drab, it almost hurts. This game is incredibly weak graphically, and compared to Luigi's Mansion from last week, it does a terrible job utilizing the GameCube's capabilities. The audio experience is somehow even worse. I gushed last week about how Luigi's Mansion is a masterclass in sound design. This game, meanwhile, forced me to turn my headset down. The music is incredibly 2000s. It's a slim selection of metal and new metal, and it's so compressed, it just gets old really fast. Then the bike sounds like a swarm of angry bees. There is a very short sound loop that just plays ad nauseum, and it doesn't really vary even when you brake or accelerate. Thank God I was streaming so I could distract myself by reading chat and yapping, because otherwise, it's rough, man. I just wanted to get off of this stage, so I took a 4th place finish, and I planned to make up the points in the next one. This turned out to be an okay idea, as track 3 was much nicer. I always enjoy snowy terrain, and I found the track to be pretty straightforward too, with lots of generous bends and some pretty cool jumps near the finish line. I was on track for a 1st place, but the game had other ideas.
Yes! Yeah! Again!
This was getting a little tight. I was in 2nd by 5 points, and Ferry was winning nearly every race. I knew I could still bring it back. The outdoor event has 5 whole stages, and the next one was another snowy level and was just what I needed. This was possibly the easiest track in the game. I sat comfortably in 1st, basically uncontested, and by now I'd more or less mastered the power slide tech to make some insane corners which the amateur AI couldn't even get close to matching. This was easily my most convincing 1st place, and by now I had a lead of just 1 point. That meant I was all but required to come 1st in the final track. This proved to be a mistake, as Thunder Peak gave me a rough time. The final event, which I will cover in a minute, was the real killer, but this was the hardest racing stage, and I spent a lot of time beating this. This was pretty much a culmination of things that had hindered me on previous stages, all in one. The AI seems to be extra vindictive here. They were beelining into me a ton and just knocking me clean out of the race. I occasionally ran into the issue of misreading the track and taking a wrong turn, and then I had more cases of tricks just failing and landings not being pixel perfect enough. It's kind of crazy looking back on it. It took me well over 30 minutes to earn a good placement in this track, which is more time than the entire indoor series took combined. I actually enjoyed the grind here though. This is a really cool level, and it pushed me to get better at the game. I wish there were more stages like this. Special shout out to my Twitch chat too. They always cheer me on during struggles like this, and that makes it so much more fun to push through. One heartbreak though was when I was super close to winning, this happened.
I don't know who Ferry is. Has the game just crashed? Yeah, it's just crashed. Oh my god. That's right, Farron. Why? Keknabi.
They had to shut me down, man. I was becoming too cracked at this game, so they slipped in a game-breaking bug. Harsh. Despite this horrendous setback, I pushed on, and after about 40 minutes total of grinding, I mastered this stage. It is funny how I put myself in this position by taking 4th place earlier. I essentially forced myself to need to be 1st. On the plus side, watching back this footage of me getting the god run of Thunder Peak is really satisfying. It was easily the best driving I did in the whole game, and it was truly a culmination of everything I had learned and practiced. I think if the entire game could somehow evoke this feeling of grinding and mastering, this could have been a far better title. As it stands though, this was just one magical moment in an otherwise drab experience. And thus, after much trial and error, I finally locked in the elusive 1st and locked down the points I needed to win the entire outdoor series. Thank God, dude. 3 down and 1 to go. Now I wish I could say that I saved the easiest or simplest for last, but my friends, this is not that sort of story. Because it's time to cover freestyle mode, and oh boy, it's a doozy. This mode is downright broken. I covered earlier about how busted the stunt system is in this game. A large number of the inputs just straight up bug and won't activate, and if you're lucky enough to get a stunt to go off, sometimes the delay has up to 5 seconds, causing you to crash land and earn no points. This mode is considered literally impossible in any difficulty except for amateur, and even then it's incredibly tight and is very random based on how lucky you get on your stunts actually activating. The score you need to reach to earn a first place is astronomical compared to how much you can earn for a successful stunt, and there is diminishing return for repeating stunts. It's honestly insane how hard this is. If you watch the Long Play Archives video of this game, they skipped freestyle and have a pinned comment explaining that in their opinion it's impossible to beat and is too bugged. But hang on a minute, this is the beating every GameCube game challenge, and if my definition of beating this is to win freestyle mode, then you bet your bottom I'm gonna do it. I had a long chat with my Twitch community, and despite them telling me that nobody would care if I just played the credits and skipped freestyle, I would care. I grinded Road Rage for 10 hours to get $1 million. I could do this. I decided to end the stream there, and no kidding, I went away and did a 20-minute off-camera Dragon Ball training arc to master this janky game. And master it, I did. I came back the next day, and I was cooking. The stunt system was still awful, and this mode is still insanely hard to beat, but I had figured out just enough to claw my way towards the high point totals that I would need to lock this down. The Freestyle series has just 2 tracks, so I would need to score enough points to be in the top 3 on the first one, and then enough to put me in first for the tournament in the second one. Now, this still wasn't easy to do by any stretch. I needed to restart after a single mistake. With how bad the controls and stunt systems are, mistakes happen. Some of the stunts can be held to boost the amount of points that you receive, and some of them can also be chained together to increase your multiplier. Boost is earned for doing stunts successfully, and it's all but required to do massive boost jumps to gain enough air for a big chain, combined with holds, or you simply won't gain enough points to get anywhere close to the top spot. After a bunch of resets and a ton of aggro fighting the controls, I finally got the God Run. I was playing out of my absolute mind, chaining stunts together, using boosts for huge air, and trying to vary up my combos to avoid the diminishing return on repeated tricks. It's a testament to how hard this is, but I still didn't get first, even with all of that. I was only about 100 points away, but my final trick got eaten by the timer, placing me in second. This left me 3 points behind Tortelli, and I decided to go all in on finishing the second stage in a high enough position to win the points game by as little as possible. This is where I made an all-important discovery. Each time you restart the stage, the comms scores change, and thus so does their placement. I realized that I could exploit this by restarting until I get a seed where Tortelli is so low that he poses 0 threat, and then I won't need to come in first to win this series, as doing so is nigh impossible. I have absolutely no problem exploiting tricks and methods that Kid Me could have discovered and used when I beat these games. So I think this is a cute way to beat an otherwise impossible challenge. And thus began a 20-minute endeavor of getting a seed where Tortelli was in a low placement, and then being able to score highly enough to be in the top 3, which I'll remind you is incredibly difficult and inconsistent. So many times I was one trick away from winning, but the time would run out, or a slightly scuffed landing would make me crash, denying me the points. For me, this is what my series is all about. Pushing myself to learn and master super niche games, and then creating videos that hopefully people can look back on and enjoy for decades to come, which encapsulate everything myself and y'all love about the GameCube. Even on a sports video like this, which typically fewer people are going to watch, I want to say I beat this game and I made a good video. So thanks to you real ones who watch these niche titles, you rock. Like all good stories, this one does have an ending. After an insane amount of trial and error, near misses, and restarting for seeds where Tortelli was beatable, I got on the run of my life. This stage was much trickier than the first, with the jumps being more condensed and landing on a slope nearly always causing a crash. It honestly felt amazing to cook, and after all that practice, at long last...
Oh my god, the inputs getting in is killing me here. Yes! I think that's it. Oh, GG.
There it is, dude. Possibly the only person to ever beat this stupid mode. Sadly, the credits don't play automatically, so I had to trigger them manually, but I could finally put this to rest knowing that I had truly beaten it as per my rules. And that concludes Supercross World, a very mixed bag to say the least. It took me 3 hours and 23 minutes to beat this one, with a solid chunk of that being freestyle. I gave this a 7 for difficulty. A few of the races were very tight and required dozens of attempts, and the freestyle mode is just ridiculous with how poorly the controls work. Enjoyment scored a 5. Streaming this one carried the experience, but I would never play it for its own sake. If you made it to the end, then please enjoy a sneak peek at what I'll be playing next time.
Alright, what are we saying? Grando Batoru 3. I think that's One Piece.
So there it is. Game 19 will be One Piece Grand Battle 3. I love One Piece as a series, but I've played almost none of the games, so I'm looking forward to checking this one out. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.